origins. But we all know the commercial ports, the commercial buildings, they could be used in emergency time for war purposes, for radical military purposes. So in that sense, there is a concern in India, and that's a logical concern. But what really worries me is that the China's power posts are building in South Asia.
Whether it's Pakistan, whether it's Nepal,
whether Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Not only these ports, if you see China's relationship with all the smaller South Asian countries, in economic terms, in political terms, China has maximized its relationship with all these. So that's the strategic concern, of course, for India and for the rest of the Asia.
So you're saying India has definitely more to fear from China than China has to fear from India?
I won't be really saying that, because that's a very interesting point to make, because if you visit to China, you will equally find that threat perception alive regarding India. I mean, in China.
But why does this exist? Why is there so much mistrust or misconception about the other in each country?
I think
these are two ancient civilizations that have bordered each other for close to 5,000 years. With the exception of the 1962 war, there really hasn't been either civilization moving into each other's territory, and they've coexisted.
The key point here is the media, the public perception. In China, what we see, the media is controlled and regulated by a system, by an authority, and there the media is having the public, the influence over public through a kind of what we call the Han nationalism. They're based on the Han nationalism aggressive mode, and then they try to influence the public mode. In India, what we have the media here is a kind of free and open media. Those who want to sell their news, they want to make the market news. So in that context, there is no cool stuff for the media. They want to sell their news item by bringing the sensitive issues related to China. So it's very difficult to control here the media, the role of the media in both the systems, because one is regulated.
So you're actually saying it is media, it is intelligentsia, it is in some parts civic society, which is actually falling to that the actual government or the sort of intergovernmental dialogues that are going on between two countries are actually far more stable and far less reactionist and alarmist.
Yes, that's partly true, because all these media writings or the scholarly writings, the aggressive writings which is coming from both the countries, it has a huge impact on the China revolution. For example, I did a survey in China last year. In fact, this is mentioned in my book. If you see the Chinese media, every second day or third day, you will find some sensitive issues, some sensitive news about India, and that's a huge step, because this was not the case in China earlier. In the last 2 to 3 years or 4 years, you will see the Chinese media has been quite open and vocal about India. Some news items are appearing regularly.
Kind of what happened with India and Pakistan in the last 20 or 30 years, where this media perceptions changing civil society. Let's just move on in that. I have a couple of related questions within the same geopolitical area now. If we move on to talk about what's happening in Tibet and perhaps with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, can you give us more on the Chinese perspective in these regions?
Yes. Talking from Chinese perspective, the Tibet issue is a complicated one, in the sense that if you see from historical point of view, the 1962 war was, the prime region behind the 1962 war was not any specific boundary or any specific geographical area. It's the Tibet issue.
Is China giving India a message?
Yes, message. But today, the Chinese, they do see the Tibet problem separate from the boundary issue. They on the one hand, they are claiming the entire Arunachal Pradesh on the basis that one of the Dalai Lama was born in Taiwan. But on the other hand, they do see the Tibetan problem as a separate issue, despite of the fact that Indian Prime Minister, President, and the Foreign Minister repeatedly has acknowledged the fact that Tibet is an autonomous part of China. But still, the Chinese have this obsessiveness that Dalai Lama stays there in India, and a huge Tibetan communities are living in India. So Tibet is used by India time and again in different sense. So Chinese are having this obsessive notion. But more than that, what really the important fact to be noted here is that it's not the Tibet as a geography or Tibet as a territory is a problematic issue between India and China anymore. It's the other issues. For example, the Tibetan refugees, the post-Dalai Lama scenario. These are some of the issues which are going to affect the China-India relations.
So you think Tibet will change? You think the Tibetan voice itself will be reduced to post-Dalai Lama? Especially if the Chinese get their way, or?
post Dalai Lama scenario, I think the Tibetan movement is going haywire. The movement doesn't have a voice for Tibet itself. The Chinese are they have already having a good control over Tibet.
Right.
But the post Dalai Lama scenario, what we'll see, one Dalai Lama in China and one Dalai Lama in India. But the most important fact to be noted here is that how the refugees who are staying in India or in the rest of the world, out of China, how they will be governed, because there would be a very decisive, strong leader to control this huge amount of Tibetan refugees who are staying.
Any successor to the Dalai Lama won't have the same voice or respect that he's had. All right, let's move away from that. Let's talk about Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. Before we do that, let's talk about Central Asia and the great game that's being fought there. China building railways across Central Asia, trying to connect Beijing to London by rail. Isn't India being left out by this?
I think India has always followed a soft power strategy in Central Asia, and India has tried to reach the Central Asian countries through its old style of foreign policy dialogue. And in that context, they bring this civilizational contact.
Right.
But if we talk about the Chinese are always a local power there,
right.
and they always have pursued a hard power strategy. If we talk about the issue of Xinjiang or the cross-border terrorism or the separatism, whatever you call them, the Chinese are following this problem since 1996-97.
Right.
Shanghai Five came up, and then SCO came up, and Chinese have used their hard power strategy to have a good control over Central Asia. And today, they don't really want to see India coming to Central Asia independently.
Right.
They want to check India's progress to Central Asia through a multilateral dialogue process.
Right.
In that context, they want to, if you see the last SCO dialogue, the Chinese were not really critical to the fact that they don't want to welcome India in SCO.
Right.
In fact, they were forthcoming that SCO has come to a age where they could think of expanding SCO and they could think of welcoming India. So they want to bring India into the board of SCO.
But with Chinese controlling the matter that India has access to, China regulating India's access to the region.
And also another fact we shouldn't forget is the Afghanistan issue.
Right.
Because
India's of course always had good strategic ties with Afghanistan, but that's always been the exception rather than the case. Yes, with the old Soviet Union, but India and Afghanistan are not connected by a land border. There is Pakistan in between. There is China in between. So perhaps you could give us a little more about what's going on.
Actually, talk about Afghanistan. India's official position is that we want to see a stable and secure Afghanistan. But talk about the Afghanistan problem itself, apart from the Western and European presence there, nobody, the Chinese, they don't really want to see India going in a large number, in a big way. So the primary competition, both in the Central Asian region and also in the Pakistan-Afghanistan region, is the Chinese competition to India. The Chinese, they don't want to see India going there in a huge number, and Indians also, they are concerned about the Chinese presence there. So that is one of those areas where we'll see, the India-China, rising competition will be there for the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay, on a last note, perhaps you can tell us more about what's going on in recent news, North Korea, and perhaps even a little prophecy about what's going to happen with Taiwan, especially if the US gets more involved right now with what's happening in North Korea. Yeah,
I think the North Korean issue is one of the most important issues in global politics today, but what really bothers me here is that as a P5 nation, as a permanent 5 nation, the Chinese have never taken an official or an open position on North Korea.
Exactly. After what happened yesterday, even the Russians responded with criticism, but the Chinese refused to criticize North Korea and in fact called for both countries to enter in dialogue, even though the North perpetuated it.
And what has been Chinese position is that they are talking about starting this six-party talk, which is not really anything. If you have to start the process of six-party talk, then you have to convince a party that you stop doing whatever you are doing. Be it the radical militarization process or the nuclear armament process. So in that context, I think the most important power who has to play a decisive role in the North Korean issue is the China. Unless they take an official position, open stand on this, it's a difficult.
But do you think China is trying to drive a bargain here? Play Korea versus Taiwan as the bloc and just say, tell the US and tell the West, we'll mediate with Korea, we'll reunite the Koreas, you leave Taiwan to us, and then we'll bring Taiwan back to.
We have to understand it in Chinese foreign policy strategy. The East Asia is one of the core and the prime importance. It's been always the prime importance in Chinese foreign policy.
Right.
In fact, if you see in order preference, East Asia has always been the first preference in Chinese foreign policy, then Central Asia, the second preference, and the third preference in South Asia.
Right.
So in that context, China doesn't really want to lose its authority over the in the
Right.
East Asian region. So in that context, North Korea is the base where they would have a greater leverage not only on the Taiwan issue, but on the South China Sea, East China Sea, and on array of issues in the East Asia. So that's key for the Chinese foreign policy strategy there. But about the Taiwan issue, I do feel that Taiwan doesn't have any political future today.
Right.
And I do say this specifically after the agreement of ECFA. If you
Right,
see
right,
this year in June, we signed this economic comprehensive framework agreement. Under that agreement, now though the Taiwanese, they will say, I mean the KMT, which is in power, the KMT would argue that the ECFA agreement is necessarily a kind of state which will give maximum benefits to the Taiwanese economy rather than the mainland economy, because Taiwan will be more integrated to the East Asian economy. But I do see that the Taiwan economy has come to a level where they are having adequate pressure from the Chinese economy and the East Asian economy. So in that context, I do see that economic compulsion will determine the political future.
Right.
So I don't really see any realistic future of Taiwan unless, again, there is a comeback for DPP in Taiwan,
Right.
and DPP goes back and withdraws the ECFA.
Right.
So,
Okay, interesting times. Definitely the Asian century. What happens, we will only have to wait and see. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure having you on
my
the show today.